NATO begins a large-scale nuclear exercise on Monday, involving dozens of aircraft and 200 troops. This was stated by NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte after a meeting with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Rutte said the following literally: "In an uncertain world, it is vital that we test our defenses, strengthen them, and let our adversaries know NATO is able to respond to any threat." The exercises do not involve the use of combat weapons, but about 2,000 military personnel will simulate missions where military aircraft carry American nuclear warheads. These words alone must give Solovyev goosebumps, and the Kremlin will definitely be tense because of these exercises. About 60 aircraft from 13 countries, including F-35 fighters and B-52 bombers, will take part in the exercise. The main maneuvers will take place in the UK airspace over the North Sea, Belgium, and the Netherlands, and the exercise will last for 2 weeks, so it will be quite long. And Mark Rutte, speaking on this topic, also called for not listening to Russia's nuclear threats. And he emphasized that the Allies do not see any direct risks of using nuclear weapons now. But the EU commented on Putin's statements and said that such threats are another evidence of irresponsible behavior that will not change Brussels' position on continuing to support Ukraine. And we received the same assurances from our partners in the North Atlantic Alliance. Europe is trying to strengthen its readiness to repel various challenges. That the alliance has indeed begun to work out such extreme scenarios when it will have to counteract Russia in this dimension of nuclear confrontation. Meanwhile, in fact, NATO countries and Europe no longer reject the possibility of a full-scale second strike from Russia, and they are talking about it very openly, updating their various rules for citizens, and so on. The most recent statement was made yesterday by the Minister of Defense of one of the Scandinavian countries, Paul Johnson, who spoke to Polish media. And he said that Russia could indeed attack Sweden for the sake of controlling the Baltic Sea. This is actually not the first time that such an opinion has been expressed. We have heard many times that the Russians could indeed take such actions, and he says that Moscow has repeatedly threatened NATO, which has allegedly gradually turned the Baltic Sea into its own lake. As the Kremlin says, and as Mr. Johnson says, Russia is a threat to Sweden as it is to the rest of NATO, and we cannot rule out a Russian attack on our country. The Kremlin's forces are still entrenched in Ukraine. Moscow has demonstrated its willingness to take serious military risks, as the Russian Navy is still stationed in St. Petersburg and Kaliningrad. Due to the Russian threat, Sweden is expanding its fleet. I will quote what the Minister of Defense said. After the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the military and commercial importance of the Baltic Sea for the Kremlin has increased even more, so we must take Russia's aggressive intentions into account in our military plans. Meanwhile, in addition to this statement from the defense minister, the local newspaper also reported yesterday that Sweden has updated its instructions to the population in case of war. The last time these instructions were updated was in 2018, and now, during Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, they decided to update them again. The Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency is updating its instructions, and the brochure is called In Case of Crisis or War. This brochure dates back to the Second World War, but now it contains new tips on what to do in the event of a nuclear attack, airstrike, or extreme, even weather conditions. We presented this brochure just the other day, and it urges citizens to prepare for the need to survive on their own without the help of the rest of society for a week. This brochure is being updated in the wake of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and new advice, and Sweden has now drawn conclusions from what is happening here. where to hide during an air attack, how to help a person with serious bleeding, and also what to do if Sweden is attacked with nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons. And in addition, also taking into account the situation in Ukraine. Given the cyber attacks that the Russians continue to launch against us and our partners, this brochure also deals with the case of any digital security issues. For example, how to store information safely at home, at work, to minimize the risk of a cyber attack, and also how to protect yourself from disinformation and influence campaigns. And, for example, the Minister of Civil Defense of Sweden, who was quoted by the Associated Press, told us why they are updating this brochure, why it is important, and said that it is no secret that the security situation has worsened since the previous brochure was published in 2018. The threat picture is more complex than before and includes cyber attacks, influence attacks, and the risk of sabotage. So these brochures will even be mailed to Swedes so that everyone can receive them and read what to do in the event of a full-scale invasion. So we can see that NATO countries are really preparing for all possible developments, conducting exercises, communicating with their citizens, and do not dismiss the threat that the Russian Federation may resort to some kind of provocation or take greater steps in its aggression.